So who are we? The whole of Buddhist practice is designed, as I say, like the GPS, enlightenment for the sake of all beings. What does enlightenment mean? It means to wake up and abide in our essential nature, which is our Buddha nature. The reason why wisdom and compassion are so closely aligned is because the clearer that we see how things really are, the greater the compassion, because nobody knows that. How sad. All the time we're Buddhas and we don't even know. We think we're who we think we are. And so we suffer. And we cause suffering to others. And we mess everything up because we don't know. And so the clearer those great masters see this, the greater their love and compassion for us all. It's not just about having, compassion for sad little puppies. It's about seeing the whole condition and how we want so much to be happy. But because of our delusion, we create so much suffering for ourselves and for others. And that's terribly sad. We are just caught up in our delusion. So, mostly, people, all of us, are living at the very surface of our mind. Right? We are living on the waves of the ocean. Up and down, up and down, up and down, very surface, caught always in our chatter, endless, like having a television on that you can never turn off in your head. Endlessly going on, all the commercials and all the endless soap operas and all the, all nonsense that's on anybody's television. It's all in our head. Blah, 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 blah. The sad bits and the happy bits and all the memories and all the hopes and fears. Blah, 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 blah. Can't turn it off. But there's another level. Our mindfulness. The ability to observe that without being drawn into it, right? So in the shamatha practice and in the vipassana practices, we're honing that skill to be able to observe and witness the mind without being drawn into the mind, just seeing thoughts and emotions as thoughts and emotions, not me, not mine, just. So that's already a huge step forward, right? We had the chattery TV mind is just the gross mind, and there is the ability to observe that, which is a more subtle level of mind, mindfulness, right? Nowadays, mindfulness is the big thing, and it's good. I mean, people say ordinary people shouldn't be taught mindfulness because they don't know it's Buddhist. Who cares? If we are able to help people to disassociate skillfully from their thoughts and their emotions and just to recognize thoughts and emotions as just thoughts and emotions so that we are more in control of our mind instead of being controlled by our mind, then that's a good thing. Even just that. I mean, the ego, which is the conceptual thinking mind, is a terrible master, but it's a good servant. We're not trying to stop thinking. Thinking is a brilliant thing. We're not trying to end up blank. But we should be in control of the mind rather than controlled by it. Then, if we are in control of our mind, then it's a wonderful tool. But as long as the mind itself with the ego is in control, then we are enslaved, and by a very pitiless master. Anyway, so the ability to be present, to observe, to be mindful is the more subtle level of the mind. But it is still caught in duality, right? We are mindful of something. We are mindful of breath. We are mindful of postures. We are mindful of sounds. We are mindful of sensations, as in the Vipassana movement. We are mindful of the mind. So there is an observer and an observed. Now this is already a big step forward, right, from being normally just swept along by the current of our thinking. But it is still dualistic. Nonetheless, mindfulness, well cultivated and clear, it's like a bridge between the ordinary conceptual thinking, chattery mind and the deeper fundamental level of our mind, which is called the nature of the mind, or our Buddha nature, or Dhammakaya, or anything you want to call it. I mean, you are putting, again, truly, names to the nameless. But by cultivating mindfulness, which anyone can do with practice, anybody can think, you know. In a second we can become present, you know. Be aware of sitting. Be aware of sitting. We can all be aware of sitting. How our body feels, the feeling of the ground between our feet, our hands, breathing. Not difficult. Being mindful is very easy. Problem is to be mindful of being mindful. Because we're mindful for a minute and then off we go again. You know, so this is the problem. It's the actual practice of mindfulness in itself is quite simple, but to sustain it is difficult. This is why people do retreats, in order to give themselves an environment in which everyone's trying to be mindful, and so that encourages us to remember to remember. The word for mindfulness in Tibetan and in Sanskrit is actually the ordinary word for to remember. And so the direct obstacle is that we forget. We forget to remember. Remember what? Remember what's happening. So once the mind has been trained, you know, first we're taming it through shamatha, and then we're training it to stay focused and present, which is mindfulness. That begins to transform the mind from being a scattered mind all over the place to being a mind which is present and cultivated and aware. When the mind is transforming itself through the presence of mindfulness, then it can transcend. The nature of the mind is inherent. It's primordially present. We do not have to create it. It is always there. So whether we're ever so good, or ever so bad, nature of the mind could care less. It's got nothing to do with it whatsoever. So the nature of the mind, our true nature, who we really are if we want to think of being anybody, the true nature is beyond subject and object. There is no sense of I and no sense of other. That doesn't mean that we therefore become a kind of amorphous blob. But that sense of separation just does not pertain in that state. There's just this open, spacious clarity. So the nature of the mind is described as being empty. Empty because you cannot see it, you cannot grasp it, you cannot taste it and touch it. It's beyond the senses. We cannot perceive it. So therefore, it's empty like space. Space cannot be seen. It cannot be tasted, touched. Has no color. If you were asked what was here in this amphitheater, in this theater here, what was there, you would say, well, there was a screen and there was chairs and there were all these steps and chairs and people and lights. But what there really is space. With no space, there would be no people, there would be no chairs, there would be no steps, there wouldn't be anything. Everything exists because there's space. So you all went off for lunch, and many of you put your bags or something on your seats so that when you came back, you could find your seat, right? You'd never been here before, but nonetheless, you come down and somebody's, excuse me, that's my seat. Truly, I mean, these nuns in front, they know. In Dharamshala, you can have fisticuffs, especially with Tibetan grandmothers. You know, this is my seat, right? You know, whoa, take one of their seats. But nobody can say, excuse me, this is my air. You can't breathe my air. This is my air. Stop breathing in my air. You know? Here we are all sitting in this very enclosed area, breathing in and breathing out each other's air, and nobody's fighting over it. Because space cannot be possessed. We cannot say, this is my space. Yeah, this is my seat. You can't say this is my space. Space is space. And then those seats, which we're so attached to, if they are analyzed down, themselves are space. Everything is space. Our human body, which seems so real and so strong and so solid, is space. Ultimately, everything is space. On a relative level, well, okay, this is ultimately space. But if I threw it at Dekila, she would feel it and she would bruise and not be happy. Because on a relative level, on an ultimate level it's space, on a relative level it appears how it is. So likewise, on a relative level, we are who we say we are and we are what we think we are. And that's fine, that's how we function on a relative level, on a conventional level. But we are not just conventional level. We are also ultimate level. Always. our problem is we don't have to invent the ultimate level. We don't have to create it. What we have to do is realize it. All beings, all living beings have Buddha nature. Buddha nature is not like a little Buddha sitting inside you. I mean, this is the problem with the word in English. In Sanskrit, it's called Tathagatagarbha, which means like the womb of the Buddha, the Tathagatas. But in the Tibetan, Nyingpo doesn't mean Buddha Nyingpo, yeah. It means like the essence, Buddha essence, the essential quality of a Buddha. Nyingpo. Yeah, it doesn't have such a solid sound as Buddha nature tends to have in English. And so it doesn't mean that everybody has a separate little Buddha nature. The whole point of Buddha nature is that it's omnipresent. And this is why it is compared to the sky, the space, because you can't say, this space is better than that space. It's just space is space. So the nature of the mind is space and empty. Right? So nature of the mind is empty, like space. You can't grasp it. You can't see it. It has no limits. Space is all penetrating. Everywhere is space. You cannot say space does not exist here because it's everywhere. So, nature of the mind is empty, like space. But, unlike space, its other quality is what in Tibetan is called selwa. And selwa is, again, one of those words which is, who knows how to translate. It means clear, it means luminous, and it means cognizing. So different people translate it in different ways: clarity, luminosity, lucidity, cognition. And it means all of those things, but there's no word in English which incorporates all of them together. So just keep in mind, that's what it all means. It means a luminous clarity, which knows. So the essential nature of the mind is that it knows. We all know, right? We are all aware. The fact you can see me or hear me is because we know. This knowing quality in Dzogchen is called rikpa. Rikpa just means know, to know something. That's all. I mean, they have all sorts of wonderful words for it, primordial awareness, but actually it just means to know. We know. There is that knowing quality without a knower. Hearing without a hearer. Seeing without a seer. That open, spacious awareness, which has no subject and object. It's just all-encompassing. That's the nature of the mind. And it's an awareness beyond the ordinary awareness which we can know about, which is why it's always, people write so many books about it, and it's all these high-level praises, but the actual relationship is really fairly simple, because it's the fundamental nature before all the elaboration. So it's naked. The symbol for the ultimate nature, for the Buddha nature in the Nyingmapa tradition is Samantabhadra, who is shown as blue because the sky, and naked. just sitting there. Because that's a symbol of the sky-like nature of the mind, which is unadorned. Yeah? So to glimpse this inherent nature, our Buddha nature, in itself is not so very difficult. Because it's who we are anyway. So, I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't see it. And you know, it's like looking in a very, very cloudy sky. And you look up, I mean, especially in India in the monsoons, the clouds, you know, the monsoons go on for month after month. And all you see when you look up are thick clouds. And so we think, oh, the sky is clouds. If you say, well, what is the sky? Well, the sky is all these thick black clouds and occasional rainbows. But if we keep looking, then one day we see the clouds part. Ah, there's a blue sky. Blue sky is always there. And then clouds back. When we go on plains, that's a very good example. You know, you go through these thick clouds, and it's thick. You look out, and it's all just thick clouds, and then suddenly, whoosh, and we're above the clouds. And you look down, and there are the clouds, but there is a vast blue sky. And that's the point, that we are the vast blue sky, infinite, never ending. We just don't know. And we identify ourselves with all the clouds, white clouds, black clouds, and we don't know the sky. So therefore, in all Buddhist schools, the first breakthrough is to glimpse the sky. In the Theravadan system, this is called entering the stream. And in the Mahayana system, it's sometimes called turning in the seat of the consciousness, or, you know, having a direct experience in the nature of the mind, or entering onto the first bodhisattva stage, the first bhumi. It's a breakthrough. Satori, Kensho, in Zen. It's a breakthrough because although we are not yet living in that reality, nonetheless now we know we are not who we think we are. That is an enormously big step forward, because we can read about it and we can think about it, but until we actually experience it, it's not going to transform. Do you understand? So it's very important, and in the Tibetan tradition, especially in Nyingma Kagyu tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on finding a teacher who will give you the pointing out instruction. Pointing out instruction is pointing out the nature of the mind. And he can't do it for you forever. You know, I mean, obviously if the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas could, you know, get us all enlightened right away, they would. They can't do that. What they can do is at least give a little opening. Then, from that point on, my Lama one time said that when you see the nature of the mind, then you can start to meditate. Because that's when you get to, now the point is to expand that little glimpse and sustain it more and more. This is also the reason why even great practitioners do a lot of practice. It's because always they're honing it more and more and more. Also so that even during sleep, one can be in that state. So that it becomes natural, more and more natural, and not just something which appears and then goes again. But the point is that it's always there. Whether we see it or we don't see it, whether it's all clouds or no clouds, the sky is the sky. And that is our true nature. So this is a very important point to recognize. So when we don't know, then that's ignorance. And when we do know, then that's wisdom, right? So it says here, the third Dharma, the third one, the one we did before, with the Vipassana, emphasized selflessness and emptiness acquired through meditation. But emptiness is not nothingness. It has wisdom and love and a great ability to project our whole realm, actually. So, yeah, so mind, it knows. I mean, the point about the mind, the essence of the mind, is this knowing, which then projects out our reality like a movie theater. You know, the projection illuminates the movie in front of us. And then, as long as we recognize it's a movie, there's no problem. Problem is when we believe it to be exactly how we think it is, then we have problems. Because it's just a movie which we're projecting. And the level of that mind is also, as I say, it's an interconnection with all beings. It's not, you know, normally we feel very separate and people are always trying to connect. But the level of the nature of the mind is this total interconnection. That is who we are. We are not separate from all other beings. We are totally interconnected with all other beings. It's very important that we recognize that. That's why compassion comes naturally. Okay, so it says the state of ordinary people, that's us, is like gold, pure gold, covered by mud. So when we look, all we see is mud. We see a big ball of mud and we think, bleh. We look at our mind and we think, oh. But all the time, encased in that mud is the gold. And the gold is never, ever affected, however thick the mud surrounding is. That's the important thing. We should not identify with the mud. We have to recognize that the mud is only covering over the pure gold of our true nature, the luminous nature of the mind, which shines forth. We've covered it up. But if we could just get rid of the covering, it's always there, it's always shining. You couldn't even hear me or know anything if it wasn't there. This is the nature of the mind, but we don't recognize it. This is why we need to go through all these stages. But it's always there. Just waiting. I mean, it's infinitely patient. So, it says, our Buddha nature is covered by temporary obscurations, but the main obscuration is our fixation on subject and object dichotomy and the sense of our separation from all other beings. There's me, and then there's everything else which is other. That is our main delusion, but it can only really be transformed through a direct experience of the nature of the mind. I mean, we can think about it, but so the view is to recognize the Buddha nature present in oneself and all sentient beings. Meditation is to sustain the continuity of that. The action is to mingle the view with daily activities and in accordance with the Dharma. And the fruition is to realize totality like the sun shining in a clear sky. So, yeah, so the point is all these meditations that we are doing, especially mindfulness, is to lead us back to recognizing our true nature, which is everybody's true nature. It's not I'm a Buddha and the rest of them are just little sentient beings. I mean, throughout the day, to recognize that every single being we meet is potentially a Buddha. But they don't know it. So they suffer. And they cause others to suffer. Because we don't know. once we wake up to recognizing the true situation, then everything changes. We don't have to externally change. Inwardly, we see with a pure perception, all these beings, they're all Buddhas. Of course, what else could we be? And of course, Buddha nature is not just inherent in human beings, it's inherent also in animals, in insects, fish, birds, anything which has sentience, consciousness. Their ultimate consciousness is Buddha consciousness. So there's no big divide between humans and animals. We have more intelligence, but our essential nature is the same. So therefore we're all interconnected. So I just would like to read you, because I think it's very poignant on the question of it's this quote from Mingyur Rinpoche. Who has never heard of Mingyur Rinpoche? Okay, good. Okay, so Mingyur Rinpoche, he's the Lama. His mother is Nepali, his father is Tibetan. His father was a very well-known in Tibetan circles Lama called Urgyen Tuku. Very lovely Lama. And he had 4 sons, all of whom are recognized as incarnate Lamas. And Mingyur Rinpoche is the youngest of them. And he was educated, actually. He was brought up in a monastery very close to where we live in India. So I've known him since he was a kid. So Mingyur Rinpoche was brought up as a tuku, as like a Dharma prince. And he did his first 3-year retreat when he was 13. Then he went into the monastic college and studied. Then he did another 3-year retreat. And then his brother, all his brothers are quite well-known teachers, but his special brother, Soknyi Rinpoche, one time wasn't able to give some teaching somewhere, so he asked Mingyur Rinpoche to step in. And so Mingyur Rinpoche did so and has never stopped since then, basically. Anyway, he had therefore had many thousands of students and a whole organization set up, and he built a huge monastery in Bodh Gaya where the Buddha got enlightened and so forth. Then, some years ago now, he decided he had had enough of that, and he wanted to leave everything behind and wander around like a beggar. So he wrote a note, a letter to his attendant and his mother and everybody saying, okay, I've gone, don't look for me. In a few years I'll come back. And off he went. He left at midnight. He had planned it all. He got new locks so that he had a key so he could get out through the front door. And I mean, he's written a book about it. Anyway, he left and he went off and he had a hard time because he was a Dharma prince. He'd probably never handled money in his life. He'd never bought a ticket. He'd never done anything for himself because he had all these, attendants since he was small. And suddenly, here he was all by himself with very, very little money, trying to make his way. And so there he was in a third-class train, sitting on the floor next to the toilets, very smelly toilets in the third-class trains, and miserable. Anyway, he goes through a lot of troubles, and he's very, very honest. It's an interesting book also because he is so extremely honest about all that he went through. And then he ends up in Kushinagara, which is where the Buddha died. And he's living in Kushinagara. And one man comes to ask him for some meditation teaching. And he said, can you teach me anything about meditation? I've been doing meditation, but it doesn't seem to be working. Could you give me some advice? So, of course, immediately Mingyur Rinpoche snaps back into his Dharma teacher role. and starts helping him with his meditations. And then the guy goes off. And meantime, Mingyur Rinpoche has run out of any money, and so now he has to just take the leavings at the end of the day from the local, restaurant. And so he gets food poisoning. And then he nearly dies, and he's living outside because he has no money anymore. He's living outside in June in Kushinagra, which must be like a hot hell. And then he is there. He has vomiting, diarrhea, severe dehydration, and essentially about to die. And then he has this experience. So I will read it to you just because, words cannot describe the experience, but this is the clearest I've ever heard anybody describe it from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view. How are we doing? Oh, yeah, we've got loads of time. Okay. So he says, awareness and emptiness became one, indivisible, just as it always is. But the recognition had never been this complete before. The last shred of cohesion slipped away. The entire universe opened up and became totally unified with consciousness. No conceptual mind. I was no longer within the universe. The universe was within me. No me separate from the universe. No direction, no within or without. No perception or non-perception. No self or non-self. No living, no dying. The internal movements of the organs and senses slowed way down to minimal functioning. I still understood what was going on, but not through commentary or voice or image. That kind of cognition no longer presented itself. The clarity and luminosity of awareness beyond concepts, beyond fixed mind, became the sole vehicle of knowing. I was no longer bonded to any sense of a distinct body or mind. No separation existed between me, my mind, my skin, my body, and the rest of the world. No phenomenon existed separate from me. Experiences happened, but no longer to a separate me. Perceptions occurred, but no reference back to anyone. No references at all. No memory, perceptions, but no perceiver. The me I had recently been, sick, healthy, beggar, Buddhist, disappeared like clouds that move through a sunlit sky. The top of my head came off. My hearing and my seeing became just hearing, just seeing. At best, words point to something beyond the conceptual mind that the conceptual mind cannot know. As a drop of water placed in the ocean becomes indistinct, boundless, unrecognizable, and yet still exists, so my mind merged with space. It was no longer a matter of me seeing trees, as I had become trees. Me and trees were one. Trees were not the object of awareness, they manifested awareness. Stars were not the object of appreciation, but appreciation itself. No separate me loved the world. The world was love. My perfect home, vast and intimate. Every particle was alive with love, beyond fluid, flowing, without barriers. I was an active particle, no interpretive mind, clarity beyond ideas. vibrant, energetic, all-seeing. My awareness did not go towards anything, yet everything appeared. As an empty mirror, both receives and reflects everything around it. A flower appears in the empty mirror of the mind, and the mind accepts its presence without inviting or rejecting. It seemed as if I could see forever, as if I could see through trees, as if I could be trees. There was no individual anything, no dualistic perception, no body, no mind, only consciousness. The cup that had contained empty space was broken, the vase shattered, extinguishing inside and outside. So, if you want to know what the nature of the mind is like, it's like that. At least if you've done 6 years of preparatory meditation. So anyway, the point of all this practice is to recognize exactly what he's talking about here. I find it interesting because what he's saying resonates so much with what all the great mystics of the world have been saying since beginningless time. You don't usually find Tibetans who describe it like that. And if you read the great mystics, exactly what they are saying, I mean, even though they use more theistic language, they're saying exactly the same thing. So this is our nature. It's not like that because he's Mingyur Rinpoche. All of us have that in us, but normally we don't recognize it. And so the point of our practice is just to come back to recognizing our home where we have never ever left, but we don't know that. So we wander all over the place until we come back home and realize that this is where we've always been. We don't know it. This is our tragedy. This is why the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have compassion, because we don't know. So what we need is to wake up to our inherent wisdom mind, which is in us the whole time, if only we can access it. Like the gold in the mud. Don't identify with the mud. Recognize the gold. Okay, so we have a break, and then when you come back, maybe for 20 minutes, and then we can have questions and answers.